Nice, nice. And to kind of piggyback on that response, that was a great response, Kevann, about prosecutors. What do you think makes a good prosecutor? I know most of you all's careers have been with criminal defense, and I'm sure you've come in contact with a lot of prosecutors. How important is diversity in the role, not only is as far as race, ethnicity, but just experiences? And I want to start with you, Heather, and then each of you can take a turn if you like.
So I'll tell you, I think I foolishly thought when I started my career that if I got a prosecutor of color, that it would be able to be an easier conversation, that we would sort of vibe and connect. As I've grown in this, I realized that experience matters, unfortunately, more than race sometimes. And so you need a prosecutor who is educated on the community that they are prosecuting. They need to not be scared of every defendant who's like coming into the courtroom. They need to not have sort of a maternalistic instinct about trying to save every client that's coming in with their own brand of sort of care. They need to be honest. One of the biggest things, and I'm thankful to say PDS has led the lead in DC on, is Brady information being had. And Brady is information that can exculpate the defendant. Why is that being hidden? Why are we starting trials and being turned over boxes of things that the government had for months? And these are prosecutors who are allowed to not only continue, but get elevated in that office and rewarded for those type of things. So we need honest prosecutors, and we need prosecutors who are over the old standard of all we do is lock people up. We are in a change. This is a revolution as to what's happening right now. And that means we need less people in cages and other means of having the community connect with them and figuring that out. And you need prosecutors who are willing to listen to that.
Nice. Nice. And Hannah, did you have any follow-up on that?
Yeah, just a brief follow-up. I think that, as we all know, it's primarily communities of color that are incarcerated. And I think that there are a number of prosecutors who may not necessarily be educated on what happens in communities of colors and the need in these communities of color. And I think that is the problem. The inability to identify with a demographic that is not your own causes some prosecutors to be overly harsh, or to think that the only way to learn a lesson is by putting somebody in a jail cell. The deterrence of not having to be in prison or not having to be in jail does not work for everybody. Some people do need rehabilitation in order for things to actually get better. If you take somebody who is significantly or severely addicted to drugs, their mind is not their own. So putting them in a jail cell is not going to do anything but just keep them off drugs for a couple of days, and then they're going to go right back to their habit. So I think that if prosecutors were more educated on what happens in communities of color, if they were more geared towards rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration, I think that we could see a little bit more of a change in our communities.
Nice, nice. Now, before we open it up for questions from the audience, and for those folks in the audience, thank you for coming. If you look, you should see a chat option on your window where you can pose questions to the group, and we will pose those questions to the panelists before we stop here. But before we get to that, and as the participants think about their questions, I just want to ask you all, what is the call to action from here? One or two, suggestions for people out there who want to see change, who, want this system to be reformed. What would you suggest for them to do? And just give your considerations for going forward. And I'll start with whoever wants to start can go ahead and jump in.
Okay, I unmuted, so I'll jump in. I think that people need to pay attention to the laws that are being passed in their communities. I think sometimes we get very comfortable with just saying, worry about it when you vote, but not looking at the legislation that's being passed. This community, and I'm speaking of the DC community, has been amazing in many moments when it chooses to come together for certain groups. We've came up with IRA legislation, which is allowing people who went to jail as juveniles, having served a portion of their sentence, to come out. I truly believe that's because the community got invested and said, those are our people, bring them home. And they had the conversations with the council people and forced them to vote and pass that legislation. So my call to action is figure out what's going on in your community, the issues that care about you, that you care about, and make sure that you are staying in touch with the people that are making the decisions. Because if you don't say something, you can't complain later when it hurts you.
Definitely.
I think we really need to keep the pressure on as well. I think that right now, we all know that the climate has kind of changed, and the attitudes towards the criminal justice system has changed a lot just in the last few years, between the time that Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin were killed and there were protests. It was completely different in terms of the demographic of the protesters, the age of the protesters. Now it's not necessarily seen as a Black issue by much of America. They see it as an American issue, which they should, because the criminal justice system is something that affects all of us. The one problem with that, though, or the one concern I have, is that it can be easy to become a little more content, because now we see that it's not just us who realizes that there's a problem. Now everyone kind of, quote unquote, gets it. So because everyone gets it, maybe we can take our foot off the gas a little bit. And I don't think that's the case at all, because protests themselves do not make change, as you said. There have to be laws that are enacted. There have to be a lot of different things that will have a tangible effect, as opposed to kind of the emotional satisfaction that we may get from protesting and letting the world know our anger and our frustration. So I think that not letting up on the gas, and now that there is change happening, now is the time to keep the pressure on and to really try to drive home the fact that changes need to be made. And I think we just have to keep going and not at all become satisfied because businesses are now saying, oh, Black Lives Matter. And we're hearing big corporations, adopting that standpoint as well. Well, that doesn't enact change on the ground, and that doesn't change what's actually happening on the day-to-day. So I think that we have to realize the fight is just starting. And although the attitudes of people have changed, the reality of what's happening has not changed. And that's not going to change from just protesting. And we need to focus on until that happens.
Absolutely.
And just to briefly add to that, I think if anything, I know this is always said in most situations, is to just at least know when it's time to vote and make sure that you're registered to vote. It's as simple as that. Because if you are in any particular community, you have the ability to express your voice in that particular community. And the least that you can do is vote in your community. There is no reason why people are missing the deadline to register to vote when it's announced almost everywhere. In every community, it's announced that, hey, this is the deadline to register, and people are still missing that deadline to register. So number one, I think voting definitely goes a long way. Number two, understanding the spheres of influence in your community, because those are the people that are going to then proactively effectuate change in your community. And so if there are people that have ties to the legislature, for instance, those are the people that you want to interact with. Doing your research and being educated on the new laws that are being proposed in your particular community or your jurisdiction is extremely important, because you're going to have a say in what happens before that law is enacted. Once the law is enacted, now you're going to have to start to fight to combat the fact that law is now enacted, and it's just much harder to undo something that it is to just actively, proactively, effectuate change and create the laws that are going to benefit you and your community.
Thank you all for that. It's very, very insightful. We do have one question from the audience. Question is, or states, I reside in Maryland, and I, let's say I'm walking on the street in Maryland. Am I obligated to identify myself, or can I simply remain silent when encountering the police? And anybody who wants to jump in can jump in there.
I'm actually not sure what the law is in Maryland. I practice in DC and in New York, and I know here in DC you do not have to show your identification. I have not practiced in Maryland, so I'm not exactly sure what the law is there.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. The suggestion that I would give is most of the ACLU sites have a Know Your Rights sort of link on them, and we have one, for every state. And so I would check that. ACLU does a really good job of kind of breaking down scenarios, right? Like if you're stopped, this is what your rights are. If you're frisked, this is what your rights are, and sort of explain it. So I would check on the ACLU's page for Maryland just to be sure. I, strangely enough, only know DC and New York like Kevann, and so I know that you don't have to here, but I don't want to give bad advice, so I would check.
Got it. Well, I think unless we have any more questions from the audience, I do think that is it. Let's see, one question just came in. Do you all have a forum for youth and young adults? Do you all have any resources for our audience, or forums where youth and young adults can go get information about criminal justice?
So I do know the ACLU of DC used to do a program specifically designed for young people. I don't know if that's still active. Again, I'd probably check their site. Kevann and I are members as well of the Black Public Defender Association, which was started back in 2018. And that's on one of our agendas of things to set up, because we do know that we've got to get to the young people early. And so feel free to follow that as well. And hopefully when we get that program together, we can recruit some members to assist.
All right, wonderful. All right, so I think we'll close out here. I want to thank you all for participating in the webinar. I know we ended a little early, but it's been very insightful. I've definitely learned a lot, and I think our audience did too. And if you could just kind of plug yourself and how people can reach out to you if they need to, if they want to, talk to you, ask about defense services, or even bring a civil claim against the police.
I had to unmute. So I'm Heather Pinckney. I'm at my firm, Harden in Pinckney. Our number is 202-621-8268. We do this as well as a little bit of family as well. So feel free. And if we don't do it, we will try to find someone like the amazing Jason Grant, who does all employment stuff. And I send everything over there. Hi, Jason.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I am, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Hannah, go ahead.
I am Hannah Akintoye. My law firm is Hannah Akintoye Law. You can reach me at 202-403-2292. You can also reach me on my website, mydclaw.com. Again, that's mydclaw.com, or on all social media platforms at mydclaw, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
And my name is Kevann Gardner. As was stated before, I'm at the Public Defender Service here in DC. My email address is kgardner, kgardner @pdsdc.org. And also we're located at 633 Indiana Avenue Northwest. If anyone has any legal questions that they just want to walk in and kind of ask. Although now with COVID going on, the office is closed. But generally, anyone who has any legal questions could just come to the office, and from 9 to 5, there will be someone who can answer those questions or point you in the right direction. And now that the office is closed, you can still call 202-628-1200, and there will be someone, the quote-unquote duty day attorney, someone who is there from 9 to 5 every day to take any legal walk-ins or legal calls that come in, so they can help advise you as well.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you all, everybody. Have a good evening and be safe out there. And I really appreciate you participating in this audience, as well as the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, y'all. Have a good one.